The classroom on Station Kepler 9 was unlike anything found on Earth. The walls shifted colors based on the emotional states of the students inside. Right now, they glowed a calm blue as 47 cadets from 17 different species sat in neat rows, waiting for their instructor to arrive. Jake Sullivan sat near the back, his human frame looking small compared to the massive Krillian beside him. The insectoid creature's forearms tapped nervously on the desk, creating a rhythm that echoed through the room. Jake had gotten used to being one of only 12 humans at the entire academy. It didn't bother him anymore. The door slid open with a soft hiss. Commander Vorath entered, his crystalline exoskeleton reflecting the blue light in fractured patterns across the walls. He was Krillian, like Jake's neighbor, but older and decorated with service medals that clinked softly as he moved to the front of the class. "Good morning," Vorath said, his voice coming through a translator that made him sound almost human. "Today, we will discuss statistical anomalies in species migration patterns." A holographic display materialized above his desk. Charts and graphs filled the air, showing data from hundreds of worlds across the galaxy. Jake leaned forward, curious despite himself. He always found these comparative studies interesting, seeing how different species behaved across the stars. "Most spacefaring species," Vorath continued, "show predictable patterns. They leave their homeworlds to explore, to work, to study. But they return. On average, 67% of individuals who leave their birth planet eventually return to live there permanently." He gestured at the data. "Some species have higher rates, some lower. The Veldorians, for example, have an 82% return rate. They are deeply attached to their homeworld." Jake noticed several Veldorian students nodding their heads in agreement. Their blue skin darkened slightly with pride. "However," Vorath said, and his tone changed. The hologram shifted, focusing on a single line of data that stood out from all the others. "There is one species with a return rate of 0%. The room went silent. Students looked at each other, confused. 0%? That was impossible. "Humans," Vorath said simply, and every head in the classroom turned to look at Jake and the other human students scattered throughout the room. Jake felt his face grow warm, but kept his expression neutral. The hologram now showed Earth, slowly rotating in the air. Data streams surrounded it, showing population numbers, migration statistics, and census information going back 200 years. "Every human who leaves Earth," Vorath explained, "never returns to live there. They visit. Yes, brief trips, usually no longer than a few weeks, but they never stay. They never go home to retire, to raise families, or to spend their final years. In the entire recorded history of human space travel, not one single human has left Earth and then returned to make it their permanent home again." A Xandarian student raised one of her energy tendrils. "Perhaps Earth is a prison world? Maybe humans are forbidden from returning?" "No," Vorath said. "Earth has no such restrictions. Humans can return whenever they wish." Another student, this one a Thorian with 6 eyes, spoke up. "Then maybe Earth is too dangerous? A death world that they escape from?" Jake almost laughed, but controlled himself. "If only they knew." "Also incorrect," Vorath said. "By all measures, Earth is one of the safest planets in the known galaxy. Disease has been eliminated. Crime is virtually non-existent. Natural disasters are controlled. It is, by most standards, a paradise." The students began talking among themselves, theories flying back and forth. Jake heard suggestions that ranged from reasonable to absurd. Some thought humans were exiled. Others suggested there was something wrong with Earth's atmosphere that made humans want to leave. One student even proposed that humans were actually refugees from some ancient disaster. Vorath let them speculate for a few minutes before raising one of his forearms for silence. "These are all interesting theories. However, I thought it would be more efficient to simply ask, He turned to look directly at Jake. "We have several humans here today. Lieutenant Martinez, would you care to explain this phenomenon?" At the front of the classroom, near the instructor's desk, Lieutenant Amy Martinez straightened in her chair. She was technically a student like the rest of them, but she also served as an assistant instructor. At 32, she had been in space for 14 years. Jake knew she had left Earth at 18 and never gone back. Martinez looked uncomfortable. Her dark eyes scanned the room, landing briefly on Jake and the other human students. There was something in her expression, a shared understanding that passed between them. Finally, she spoke. "Commander, with respect, I don't think I can explain it in a way that would make sense to you." Vorath's mandibles clicked together, a sign of frustration. "Try." Martinez stood slowly. "It's not that Earth is bad. It's not that we're running from something. It's more like..." She paused, searching for words. "We're running toward something." "Toward what?" Vorath asked. Before Martinez could answer, Jake found his hand rising into the air. He didn't plan it. The gesture was automatic, driven by something he couldn't quite name. Every eye in the room turned to him again. "Cadet Sullivan?" Vorath said. Jake stood. His heart was pounding, but his voice came out steady. Vorath's crystalline eyes studied him for a long moment. Then he gestured for Jake to continue. Jake took a breath. He thought about home, about the parks that had been engineered to perfection, about the mountains that were monitored by 1,000 sensors, about the oceans that held no mysteries anymore. He thought about the day he had decided to leave, standing in his family's apartment, looking out at a city that ran itself, where nothing was needed from him. "I left Earth," Jake said clearly, his voice carrying to every corner of the classroom, "because it was too simple." For 3 full seconds, nobody moved. Then the classroom erupted. Students shouted questions in a dozen languages. The translation system struggled to keep up, creating a cacophony of overlapping voices. The Krillian beside Jake turned all 4 of his arms toward him, mandibles clicking rapidly in agitation. The Veldorian students looked offended, as if Jake had insulted their entire concept of civilization. Only Commander Vorath remained still, his eyes fixed on Jake with an expression that might have been curiosity or might have been concern. "Silence," Vorath commanded, and the room obeyed. He looked at Jake with what might have been respect. "Explain what you mean by too simple." "Cadet Sullivan." Jake opened his mouth to respond, but found he didn't know where to start. How could he explain Earth to beings who had never known what it was like to live in a world where every problem had been solved, where every need was met before you even knew you had it, where life was safe and comfortable and absolutely, utterly predictable? Lieutenant Martinez caught his eye and gave him a small nod. Her expression said what Jake was thinking. This was going to be a very long conversation. Jake remained standing, while 46 pairs of alien eyes stared at him. He had their attention now, but he wasn't sure how to make them understand. How do you explain loneliness in paradise to someone who has never experienced either? "Earth is perfect," Jake began slowly. "And I mean truly perfect. 200 years ago, we solved our last major problem. We have unlimited energy from fusion reactors that are completely clean. We can make any food we want from base molecules. No one goes hungry. Ever. No one is homeless. No one gets sick from diseases we used to fear." The Xandarian student raised her tendril again. "This sounds wonderful. Why would you leave?" "Because," Jake said, trying to find the right words, "there's nothing left to do." Confused murmurs rippled through the classroom. Commander Vorath held up an arm for quiet. "Continue." "Cadet." Jake thought back to his childhood on Earth. "When I was 10 years old, I wanted to climb a mountain. My parents took me to the Himalayas, to Mount Everest. But it wasn't really climbing. There were steps carved into the rock, handrails made of some material that was impossible to slip on. Every 100 meters, there was a rescue drone hovering nearby. Just in case. The weather was controlled so there were no storms. The air was enriched with oxygen so you could breathe easily at any altitude. He paused, remembering the disappointment he had felt standing at the summit. When I got to the top, I didn't feel like I had accomplished anything. I felt like I had taken a very long, very safe walk. There was no danger, no risk, no chance of failure. And because of that, there was no real success, either. A Thorian student spoke up. But surely there were other challenges, other things to accomplish? Like what? Jake asked. I wanted to be a pilot. I studied for years, got the best grades, qualified for every certification, but by the time I was ready to fly, artificial intelligence had gotten so good that human pilots were obsolete. The AI could react faster, calculate better, and never made mistakes. The same with doctors, engineers, architects, almost every profession you can think of. Lieutenant Martinez stood up. May I add something, Commander? Vorath nodded. Martinez walked to the center of the room. I was a pilot too. The best in my class, actually. I flew rescue missions for 5 years on Earth. But every mission was the same. The AI would locate the person in trouble, calculate the optimal flight path, and basically fly the craft itself. All I did was sit there in case something went wrong. But nothing ever went wrong. The systems were too good. She looked around at the alien faces watching her. One day, I realized I hadn't made a single real decision in months. Every choice was made for me by computers that were smarter and faster than I could ever be. I was decoration. I was redundant. Another human student raised her hand. Lisa Chen. Jake remembered her name. She was in his engineering class. Commander, can I share something too? Go ahead, Cadet Chen. Lisa stood, her small frame somehow commanding attention. I wanted to be a chef. I love cooking. I love the creativity of combining ingredients, the art of making something delicious. But on Earth, we have food synthesizers that can create any dish perfectly. Not just the taste, but the exact molecular structure. They can make food that is literally identical to what the greatest chefs in history created. She smiled sadly. I could spend years perfecting a recipe, and the synthesizer could duplicate it in 30 seconds. My grandmother told me stories about when cooking was necessary, when people had to learn and practice and sometimes fail. She said that the failures made the successes mean something, but I never got to experience that. Everything I made, the synthesizer, could make better. The classroom was completely silent now. Even Commander Vorath seemed to be processing this information differently than before. Jake continued. We have virtual reality on Earth that is indistinguishable from real experience. You can live entire lifetimes in a few hours. You can climb real mountains with real danger, except it's all simulated. You can explore the ocean depths without any actual risk. You can paint masterpieces, write novels, compose symphonies, all with AI assistance that makes everything you create technically perfect. But none of it matters, Lisa said quietly. Because none of it is real. And even if you do something real, something with your own hands in the physical world, you know that a machine could do it better and faster. Commander Vorath's mandibles clicked slowly. So humans leave Earth because they have no purpose there? Not exactly, Martinez said. The people who stay on Earth, about 2 billion of them, they're happy. They genuinely enjoy the peace and comfort. They like virtual reality and perfect safety. They don't need challenge or struggle to feel fulfilled. But the rest of us? She gestured at the human students. We're different. We need to be needed. We need to solve problems. We need to face real risks with real consequences. Jake nodded. When I was 14, I told my parents I was going to leave Earth when I turned 18. They weren't surprised. They said that about 90% of humans feel the same way by the time they're teenagers. Earth has programs to help young people prepare for leaving. They encourage it. Actually, a Veldorian student finally spoke. his voice confused and almost sad. "But Earth is your home. Don't you miss it? Don't you want to return?" "Crossed. Every day," Jake admitted. And he was surprised by how true it was. "I miss my family. I miss the smell of rain on the garden outside our apartment. I miss the food my mother made, even though it came from a synthesizer. But I can't go back. Not to stay." "Why not?" the Veldorian pressed. Jake struggled to find the words. "Because on Earth, I could live for 200 years in perfect comfort and die having never really lived at all. Out here, in the galaxy, things are messy, unpredictable, dangerous. Problems exist that actually need solving. The AI can't fix everything. Human beings are still necessary." Lisa added, "Last month, I helped repair a damaged ship. The AI recommended we wait for replacement parts, which would take 3 weeks. Instead, I figured out how to modify components from another system to work temporarily. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't perfect. But it worked, and the ship was operational in 2 days. That feeling of solving a real problem that actually mattered, I never had that on Earth." Martinez looked at Commander Vorath directly. "That's why humans don't return to Earth, sir. Not because it's bad, but because it's too good. It's so perfect that there's nothing left for us to do there. We're not running away from Earth. We're running toward everything else. We're running toward challenge, toward uncertainty, toward the possibility of failure. Because without those things, success doesn't mean anything." Commander Vorath was quiet for a long moment. His crystalline body refracted the light in complex patterns, as he thought. Finally, he spoke. "This is difficult to understand. My species values certainty and safety above all else. The idea of seeking out danger deliberately seems almost pathological to us. And that's okay," Jake said. "We're not saying your way is wrong. We're just different. Humans spent millions of years evolving in chaos. We only had real peace and safety for the last 200 years." The bell chimed, signaling the end of class, but nobody moved. Commander Vorath finally nodded. "We will continue this discussion next week. I have much to consider." Dismissed. As the students filed out, Jake caught Martinez's eye. She gave him a small smile that said, "Well done. But they still don't really get it." Jake smiled back. They probably never would. And somehow, that was okay too. Commander Vorath did not believe them. Jake could see it in the way the Krillian's mandibles clicked during their next class session, in the way his crystalline eyes lingered on the human students with something that looked like skepticism. Explaining human psychology was one thing. Proving it was another. 3 weeks after Jake's explanation, Vorath announced a special training exercise. "This simulation," he said, "will test your problem-solving abilities in impossible situations. You will work in teams of 4. I have selected the teams myself." Jake found himself grouped with Lisa Chen, a Thorian named Krell, and a Veldorian named Dex. They stood in the simulation chamber, a large white room that could create any environment through holographic projection. The simulation began. They were diplomats on a space station where 2 species were on the brink of war. Each side had legitimate grievances. Each side had weapons pointed at the other. The team's job was to prevent the war. Jake watched as Krell followed standard diplomatic protocols. The Thorian was methodical, careful, and completely by the book. He proposed mediation, arbitration, and compromise. Everything he suggested was perfectly reasonable, according to established galactic law. It didn't work. In the simulation, both sides rejected the proposals. Tensions escalated. Within an hour, the simulation showed weapons being fired. The war had begun. They failed. Krell's 6 eyes blinked in confusion. "But I followed all the proper procedures." Dex, the Veldorian, nodded agreement. "The protocols exist for a reason. If they didn't work, the simulation must be flawed." Jake looked at Lisa. She had the same expression he felt on his own face, a mix of understanding and frustration. "Can we try again?" Jake asked Vorath, who was observing from outside the chamber. The commander's mandibles clicked. "Very well. The scenario will reset." This time, Jake took the lead. He ignored the protocols entirely. Instead of trying to mediate between the two sides, he created a third problem. He hacked into the station's systems, something that definitely wasn't allowed, and triggered a false alarm about a reactor breach. Suddenly, both species had a common enemy, a shared crisis. In the chaos, while both sides were focused on the reactor threat, Jake had Lisa create a communication channel that routed through neutral territory. He convinced each side that the other side had been manipulated by an outside force trying to start the war. It was a lie, but it gave both sides a way to back down without losing face. The simulation ended with the war prevented and both species talking to each other. Krell stared at Jake in shock. "You broke 17 regulations. You lied to both parties. You created an emergency that wasn't real, but it worked." Jake said simply. "You didn't know it would work," Dex protested. "What if it failed? What if the false alarm made things worse?" Jake shrugged. "Then we would have tried something else. The protocol wasn't working, so we needed to try something that wasn't protocol." Commander Vorath said nothing, but Jake saw him making notes on his datapad. The next test came a week later, a survival scenario in a hostile environment. The team had limited supplies and needed to last 7 days, until rescue arrived. The simulation placed them on a frozen moon with inadequate shelter and failing equipment. Most of the alien students did what made sense. They rationed supplies carefully. They stayed in the shelter despite its problems. They conserved energy and waited for rescue. Some teams lasted 4 days before the simulation ended with their deaths. The best team, all Krillians, lasted 5.5 days. Then it was Jake's turn. His team included Lisa and a human named Ben Harper, along with 2 alien students. Ben was a combat specialist, built like a block of muscle, with a reputation for being intense. When the simulation started, Ben immediately began taking apart their equipment. "This heater is broken, but the power core is fine. This communicator is dead, but the antenna works. This emergency beacon won't transmit, but it has a good battery." The alien students watched in horror as Ben dismantled everything they had been given. "What are you doing?" one of them demanded. "We need that equipment. This equipment is designed to fail," Lisa said, understanding immediately. "It's part of the test. We're supposed to accept the limitations and see how long we can survive within them." "So we're not going to accept the limitations," Jake finished. For the next 6 hours, the 3 humans rebuilt their equipment in ways it was never designed to function. They used the heater's power core to boost the communicator's range. They modified the beacon to transmit on a different frequency. They created a makeshift generator from parts that were supposed to be irreparable. The alien students thought they were insane, but by day 3, when other teams were dying from cold and equipment failure, Jake's team had working heat, communication, and a signal that was strong enough to call for early rescue. Vorath ended the simulation early. "This scenario was designed to be unwinnable, 1 point," he said, his voice strange through the translator. "The equipment was supposed to fail in ways that could not be repaired. But it can be repaired," Ben said, grinning despite obvious exhaustion. "It just can't be repaired the way it was originally built. You have to use it for things it wasn't meant for. That's dangerous," Vorath said. "Sure," Ben agreed. "But you know what's more dangerous? Freezing to death because you followed the rules." The final test was a combat scenario. A defensive position against overwhelming odds. Standard military doctrine was clear. When outnumbered 4-1, you retreat and regroup. It was basic tactical sense, taught to every cadet in their first month. Jake's team was given the scenario. They had 20 soldiers defending a supply depot against 80 attackers. The smart move was to evacuate. Ben looked at the scenario map for exactly 10 seconds before saying, We're going to attack. Well, 10, 2. The alien cadets on his team tried to protest. The numbers made it impossible. Attacking was suicide. Every tactical manual said so. Then they won't expect it, Ben said simply. What followed was the most chaotic 15 minutes Jake had ever witnessed in a simulation. Ben led a charge that made no tactical sense whatsoever. They abandoned defensive positions to rush the enemy. They split their forces in ways that should have gotten them destroyed. They used their weapons in unconventional ways, like using emergency flares as improvised flashbangs. It worked. The enemy force, programmed to expect rational defensive tactics, couldn't adapt to the sheer audacity of the attack. Ben's team won with only 3 simulated casualties. Afterward, Ben ended up in the medical bay anyway. He had pushed himself so hard during the simulation that he collapsed from exhaustion, but when Jake visited him, Ben was smiling. "That felt alive," he said, eyes bright despite his fatigue. "That felt real." Commander Vorath called a meeting with all the human students and instructors that evening. Lieutenant Martinez, Jake, Lisa, Ben, and 7 other humans sat in a small conference room while Vorath stood at the head of the table. "I have been observing humans for 3 weeks, Vorath said. "I am beginning to understand what you meant about Earth being too simple. You do not just refuse to accept limitations. You seem to be personally offended by them." Martinez smiled. "That's actually a pretty good way to put it." Vorath's mandibles clicked in what might have been frustration. "But this is not rational. Rules exist for safety. Protocols exist because they work. You ignore both, and somehow succeed anyway." "Because rules and protocols assume a fixed reality," Jake said. "They assume the situation is what it is and can't be changed. But humans don't think that way. We think reality is negotiable. Reality is not negotiable," Vorath said firmly. "Tell that to Ben," Lisa said, grinning. "He just won a fight he was supposed to lose by 4 times the margin." Vorath was quiet for a long moment. "You left Earth because there were no more problems to solve. And now you create problems when they don't exist, just to solve them." "No," Martinez said gently. "We don't create problems. We refuse to accept that some problems are impossible. There's a difference." The commander looked at each human in turn. "I do not understand you, but I am starting to see why the galaxy needs you. You are very strange creatures," Jake laughed, coming from a crystalline insectoid alien that was saying something. But Vorath was right. Humans were strange. They had left paradise because it was too perfect. And now, they lived in chaos because it felt like home. Outside the window, stars stretched across the void. Each one represented possibility, challenge, and uncertainty. Somewhere among those stars was Earth. Perfect and peaceful. Jake thought about it sometimes. But he never wanted to go back. Out here, nothing was simple. And that was exactly how he liked it. The alarm started at 0300 station time. Jake woke instantly. Years of military training overriding his need for sleep. The red emergency lights cast everything in his quarters in a crimson glow. His datapad was already flashing with urgent messages. Critical system failure. All personnel report to emergency stations. He dressed quickly and ran into the corridor. Other cadets were emerging from their rooms, most of them looking confused and frightened. The station shuddered beneath their feet, a deep metallic groan that vibrated through the walls. "Move! Move!" A Krillian officer was directing students toward the emergency assembly points. "This is not a drill. Move!" Jake found Lisa and Ben in the main corridor. Ben's face was set in grim determination. Lisa looked scared but focused. "What's happening?" Lisa asked. Another shudder ran through the station. Somewhere in the distance, they heard an explosion. "We're under attack," Ben said. I caught a glimpse of the tactical display. Raider ships. At least 6 of them. They reached the main assembly hall where hundreds of cadets and staff were gathering. Admiral Kess, the station commander, stood on a raised platform. The Veldorian's blue skin looked almost gray with stress. "Listen carefully," Kess said, her voice amplified across the hall. "We are experiencing cascading system failures in our defense grid. The Raider attack triggered something. A virus or sabotage we don't understand. Life support is failing on decks 7 through 12. Weapons are offline. Shields are at 30% and dropping." A holographic display appeared above her, showing the station's status. Jake felt his stomach sink. More than half the station's systems were red. Critical failures everywhere. "Our AI has calculated the odds," Kess continued. 94% casualties if we remain on the station. We are beginning immediate evacuation. All non-essential personnel will proceed to the escape pods in an orderly fashion. The room erupted in controlled chaos. Officers began organizing evacuation groups. Students lined up according to species. Those who needed special atmospheric conditions prioritized first. Jake saw Commander Vorath near the front of the room. The Krillian was helping direct traffic, his 4 arms moving efficiently to guide students toward the exits. Then Jake saw the human section. Lieutenant Martinez was there with the other human instructors. But they weren't lining up for evacuation. They were talking urgently among themselves, looking at data pads, shaking their heads. Jake pushed through the crowd until he reached them. "Lieutenant?" Martinez looked up. Her face was set in an expression Jake recognized. It was the same look she had worn during simulations when she was about to do something that wasn't in the manual. "The evacuation is a trap," she said bluntly. "What?" "Look at the Raider positions." She showed him her data pad. The enemy ships were positioned in a pattern around the station. If we evacuate, the escape pods will launch directly into their firing solutions. The AI's calculations assume we stay on the station where it's dangerous. But it doesn't account for the fact that evacuating is even more dangerous. Ben appeared beside Jake. "So, what do we do?" Captain Ryan Foster, the head of the Human Defense Wing, stepped forward. Jake had never formally met him, but everyone knew Foster. He was a legend, a human who had served in space for 20 years. His face was scarred from a dozen battles, and his eyes had a look that said he had seen things most people couldn't imagine. "We fix the station," Foster said simply. "Sir, with respect." The AI said it's impossible. One of the human instructors protested. "The cascading failures are in systems that can't be repaired without replacement parts we don't have." Foster smiled, and it was not a comforting expression. "Then we'll repair them with parts they weren't designed to use. Standard human protocol for impossible situations." He raised his voice. "All human personnel, listen up. We are not evacuating. We're going to save this station." Jake felt something surge in his chest. It was fear. Definitely. But also something else. Excitement. Purpose. The feeling that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Martinez was already organizing teams. "Jake, Lisa, Ben, you 3 take deck 9. The shield generators are failing there. I don't care how you do it, but get them working." "What about the Admiral?" Lisa asked, glancing toward where Kess was still coordinating the evacuation. "I'll handle the Admiral," Foster said. They ran. The corridors were chaos now, with people fleeing toward escape pods, while alarms blared, and the station groaned around them. Jake, Lisa, and Ben moved against the flow, heading deeper into the damaged sections while everyone else ran toward safety. Deck 9 was a disaster. Smoke filled the corridors. Exposed wiring sparked from the walls. The shield generator room looked like it had been hit by a bomb. Control panels were shattered. Coolant leaked from ruptured pipes. The main generator core was dark and silent. "The AI was right," Lisa said quietly, looking at the devastation. "This can't be repaired. The entire system is destroyed." "Then we don't repair the system," Jake said. "We build a new one." For the next 3 hours, They worked like people possessed. Jake found a functioning power core in a damaged food synthesizer, 3 decks away, and hauled it back. Lisa rerouted the station's gravity plating to provide structural support for the failing generator housing. Ben used emergency medical equipment to bypass the destroyed cooling system. Nothing they did was safe. Nothing they did was according to regulations. They were using equipment in ways it was never designed for, connecting systems that should never be connected, bypassing safeties that existed for good reasons. But it worked. The shield generator hummed back to life. The power flow was unstable, and the whole thing might explode at any moment. But it was running. Shields came back online, not at full power, but enough to deflect the raiders' attacks. Jake's communicator crackled. Martinez's voice came through, breathless and excited. "Shields are up. Whatever you 3 did, keep doing it. We've got weapons coming back online on decks 4 and 6. Foster's team got life support stabilized. Around the station, other human teams were performing similar miracles. They were jury-rigging solutions that should have been impossible. They were refusing to accept what the AI had told them was inevitable." In the command center, Admiral Kess stared at her displays in disbelief. The station was coming back to life. Systems that had been dead were functioning again, held together by modifications that made no sense according to any engineering manual. "How?" she whispered. Commander Vorath stood beside her. "Humans," he said simply, and there was something in his voice that might have been awe. The raiders, seeing their easy target suddenly defending itself, retreated. Their plan had relied on the station, evacuating. They hadn't prepared for a fight against a station that refused to die. When the all-clear finally sounded, Jake sat on the floor of the generator room, too exhausted to stand. Lisa was leaning against the wall, her face smeared with coolant and soot. Ben was grinning despite a nasty burn on his arm. "We're all going to be written up for violations," Lisa said. "Probably," Jake agreed. "Worth it," Ben said, still grinning. Foster's voice came over the station-wide communication system. "All human personnel? Well done. Report to medical for evaluation, and someone tell Admiral Kess that her station isn't destroyed. You're welcome." Jake laughed. It hurt to laugh, his ribs aching from exertion. But he couldn't help it. They had just saved a space station, using nothing but improvisation and stubbornness. They had looked at a 94% chance of death and decided those odds weren't acceptable. Later, in the medical bay, Admiral Kess visited the human wing. She walked slowly among the beds where human personnel were being treated for injuries. Burns, cuts, exhaustion, broken bones. Not a single human had died. Meanwhile, the aliens who had evacuated had suffered heavy casualties when the escape pods flew into the raiders' ambush, exactly as Martinez had predicted. Kess stopped at Jake's bed. "You could have died," she said. "All of you." The AI calculated that staying on the station was almost certain death. Jake thought about how to answer. Finally, he said, "Admiral, the AI didn't account for humans. We're really bad at accepting predetermined outcomes." Kess was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded. "Effective immediately, I am issuing a new protocol. For any situation designated as impossible or unwinnable, human personnel must be consulted before evacuation orders are given." She left, and Jake closed his eyes. Every muscle in his body hurt. He was probably going to have nightmares about exploding shield generators. But underneath the pain and exhaustion was a feeling of deep satisfaction. This was what Earth could never give him. Not the danger, not the risk, but the feeling that his choices mattered, that he had made a difference, that he had been necessary. Outside the window, stars shone in the eternal dark. Somewhere out there was Earth, safe and perfect, and Jake had never been happier to be far away from it. 6 months after the raider attack, Jake stood in front of a mirror, adjusting his uniform. Graduation day. The Academy's ceremonial hall was filled with families and dignitaries from across the galaxy. Jake's parents had sent a holographic message from Earth. They were proud, they said, and they understood why he wouldn't be coming home. The graduation ceremony was a grand affair. Admiral Kess gave a speech about honor and duty. Commander Vorath presented awards to the top students from each species. When it came time for the human contingent, Captain Foster called Jake's name. Jake walked across the stage to polite applause. As the top human graduate, he had been asked to give a short speech. He stepped up to the podium and looked out at the assembled faces, hundreds of beings from dozens of species, all watching him. He thought about Commander Vorath's question from 6 months ago, the question that had started everything. Why do no humans return to Earth? 6 months ago, Jake began. Commander Vorath asked our class a question about humans. He wanted to know why we leave Earth and never come back. At the time, I gave a simple answer. I said I left because Earth was too simple. He paused, gathering his thoughts. I've learned a lot since then. About the galaxy, about other species, and about my own people. I want to expand on that answer today. Jake activated a holographic display showing Earth. The blue and green planet rotated slowly, beautiful and peaceful. Earth 200 years ago was a different place. We had wars, poverty, disease, starvation. We fought over resources and territory. We struggled just to survive, but we worked hard and we solved those problems. We created unlimited energy. We eliminated disease. We built a world where everyone had everything they needed. The image shifted, showing cities of gleaming towers, parks of perfect beauty, oceans cleaned of all pollution. We thought we had built paradise. And, in many ways, we had. Earth became the safest, most comfortable planet in the known galaxy. A place where nothing could hurt you. Where every need was met before you even knew you had it. Jake looked out at the audience. He saw his fellow human graduates nodding. They understood, but something unexpected happened. Within one generation, humans started leaving. Not because Earth was bad, but because it was too good. We had engineered away all our problems, but in doing so, we engineered away our purpose. He changed the image to show data, the same statistics Vorath had presented months ago. The 0% return rate that had seemed so mysterious. Humans evolved in chaos. For millions of years, we survived by adapting, by solving problems, by refusing to give up even when everything seemed impossible. Those traits are in our DNA. They're part of who we are. And Earth, in all its perfection, had no use for those traits anymore. Jake saw Commander Vorath in the audience, his crystalline body refracting the light. The Krillian was listening intently. So we left. Not all of us, but most of us. The ones who stayed on Earth are happy there. They genuinely enjoy the peace and comfort. But the rest of us? We needed something else. We needed to be necessary. The hologram changed to show images from the Raider attack. The damaged station. The human teams working in desperate conditions. The jury-rigged repairs that shouldn't have worked, but did. 6 months ago, this station should have been destroyed. The AI calculated a 94% casualty rate. Standard protocols said to evacuate. But humans looked at that situation and saw something different. We saw a problem that needed solving. A challenge that needed facing. We saw a chance to matter. Jake's voice grew stronger. We didn't save this station because we're better than other species. We saved it because we're desperate. Desperate for challenge. Desperate for problems to solve. Desperate to prove that we're still necessary in a universe that doesn't really need us. The audience was completely silent now. Even the translators seemed to pause, as if the machines themselves were processing his words. That's why we don't return to Earth. Because Earth is a parent who raised us well, solved all our problems, and gave us the greatest gift a parent can give, It let us go. It didn't need us anymore. So it freed us to find places that did. Jake looked at the image of Earth one more time. I think about home every day. I miss my family. I miss the gardens and the mountains and the smell of Earth's air. But I can't go back. Not to stay. Because on Earth, I could live for 200 years in perfect safety and die having never really mattered. Out here, in this chaotic, dangerous, unpredictable galaxy, I matter. We all do. He stepped back from the podium to thunderous applause. Not just polite ceremony anymore, but genuine appreciation. As he walked back to his seat, he passed Commander Voreth. The Krillian reached out one of his 4 arms. I understand now, Voreth said quietly. You are not running from Earth. You completed it. Jake smiled. Exactly. After the ceremony, Jake found Lisa and Ben outside the hall. They stood at a large viewport, watching ships come and go from the station's docking bays. What's next for you? Lisa asked. I got assigned to a survey ship, Jake said. Exploring unknown systems, mapping new planets. Probably dangerous. Definitely uncertain. What about you? Engineering Corps, Lisa said. They want me to work on stations in frontier space. Building infrastructure in places where nothing exists yet. It's going to be challenging. Ben grinned. I'm joining the Rapid Response Force. The units they send when everything has gone wrong, and someone needs to make it right anyway. Should be fun. They watched a transport ship launch, its engines glowing bright against the darkness of space. Do you think we'll ever go back? Lisa asked. To Earth, I mean. Even just to visit? Jake thought about it. Maybe. Someday. But not soon. There's too much out here that needs doing. A new ship was approaching the station. Jake's datapad chimed with a message. The Academy was getting 5 new human instructors next month. More humans spreading across the galaxy, taking their peculiar approach to problems with them. The Galactic Council requested human advisors, Ben said, reading his own datapad. For situations they designate as unsolvable. They're calling us troubleshooters. Lisa laughed. That's one way to put it. We're the people you call when normal methods don't work. When normal methods don't work, Jake corrected. Or when everyone else has already given up. Lieutenant Martinez appeared beside them. She had decided to stay at the academy as a full instructor. I heard your speech, she said to Jake. Well done. You made it sound almost poetic. Humans searching the galaxy for purpose. Isn't that what we're doing? Jake asked. Martinez smiled. Maybe. Or maybe we're just stubborn and can't accept a world where everything works perfectly. Either way, the galaxy seems to appreciate having us around. She looked out at the stars. I got a message from my mother on Earth. She said the population is stable now at 2 billion. Everyone who wants to stay has stayed. Everyone who wanted to leave has left. Earth has found its balance. And the rest of us have found ours, Ben said. A supply transport was departing for Earth, one of thousands that kept the homeworld connected to its scattered children. Jake watched it accelerate away, heading toward that distant blue planet that he still thought of as home. Even though he would probably never live there again. Earth gave us everything, Jake said quietly. It gave us life, raised us, taught us, and then set us free. That's not a tragedy. That's love. Lisa nodded. My grandmother told me something before I left. She said that Earth didn't fail us. We succeeded Earth. We solved every problem it could give us, and now we're solving problems for the rest of the galaxy. The 3 of them stood in comfortable silence, watching ships move against the backdrop of stars. Each ship was going somewhere different. Each crew had their own mission, their own challenges to face. Jake thought about the question that had started everything. Why do no humans return to Earth? Now he knew the answer wasn't simple at all. It was about purpose and necessity, about challenge and meaning, about a species that had built paradise and then realized paradise wasn't enough. Humans needed to struggle. Not because they were broken, but because struggle was how they found meaning. Earth had become a place without struggle, and so humans had left to find it elsewhere. "Do you ever regret leaving?" Lisa asked suddenly. Jake considered the question carefully. "Every day," he admitted. "And never." Both. At the same time, Ben understood. "We miss Earth because it's home. But we don't go back, because out here is where we belong." Martinez put a hand on each of their shoulders. "Earth will always be there. Perfect, peaceful, waiting. But the galaxy is where we're needed. Where we can make a difference. Where we can fail and succeed and struggle and triumph. That's what Earth taught us to do. Even if it couldn't give us a place to do it anymore." A new message came through on Jake's datapad. His ship was ready. It was time to go. He took one last look at the viewport. At the stars stretched across infinity. Somewhere out there was his next assignment, his next challenge, his next chance to prove that humans still mattered in an universe that had learned to work without them. "Ready?" Lisa asked. Jake smiled. "Always." They walked together toward the docking bays, 3 humans among thousands of aliens, all of them heading out into the galaxy to find their own purposes. Behind them, Earth spun in its distant orbit, beautiful and perfect and empty of the children who had grown beyond its ability to challenge them. The galaxy was vast and chaotic and uncertain. And for humans, that made it the only place that felt like home.